Well, moving on to some other news for you now this Friday. One word dominated late night TV comedy in the U.S. between Thursday and Friday, and it's not exactly a humorous one. That's censorship. Several comedian hosts grilled the U.S. president for what they described as censoring Jimmy Kimmel over his comments on the MAGA movement's reactions to the murder of right-wing influencer Charlie Kirk. Well, after threats from the chair of the Federal Communications Commission, the ABC network suspended Kimmel indefinitely, a decision, of course, that the U.S. president hailed. Take a listen.
I read someplace that the networks were 97% against me. I get 97% negative, and yet I won easily. I won all 7 swing states, popular, won everything. And if they're 97% against, they give me only bad publicity or press. I mean, they're getting a license. I would think maybe their license should be taken away.
Well, so how did the MAGA Republican Party go from framing itself as the ultimate protector of free speech to widespread, really, accusations of censorship? For more on this, we're going to speak now to Julien Labarre. He's a political scientist at the University of Zurich. Thank you very much for joining us today, Julien. To get started, I want to talk about kind of the legal ramifications, or perhaps the legal battle that could be ahead in the wake of this decision. What do you expect to happen now?
Well, I think most of these lawsuits are not brought up against those channels to actually go to the end of the procedure. I think those lawsuits are brought up as an intimidation tactic, as a way to tell those media giants that, you have to weigh your editorial independence versus whatever commercial ambitions you have. And when, some of these lawsuits jeopardize billion-dollar mergers, media giants understand that they have to make a choice to be on the good side of the president.
I mean, is the law on the FCC's side in this case?
No, but I don't think that really matters, because Brendan Carr, who heads the FCC, before being, an expert in media regulations, is a Trump loyalist. And if the president wants him to go after those channels, I think he will do that.
And you say it might not matter, but if a case like this, or those similar to cases like this, were to reach the Supreme Court, how would you expect this to play out there, given, of course, the conservative makeup of the Supreme Court, but also the reality of the First Amendment?
Well, sure, justices come and go. Right now, we have a conservative bench, but they come and go. But, I'm not convinced that the Supreme Court wants to revise its interpretation of the First Amendment. That being said, I'm also not persuaded that the president cares what the Supreme Court has to say on the issue. And that really speaks to a problem that we've known for a very long time, since Andrew Jackson's presidency, which is that, the Supreme Court does not have an enforcement mechanism to enforce its rulings. Andrew Jackson said, the Supreme Court made its decision, let them enforce it. And so, I am particularly worried that President Trump will not do what other presidents have done in the past, which is submit his political ambitions to democratic norms, such as respecting what the Supreme Court says.
The legal elements aside, Julien, I want to kind of talk about the ideological element to this, because what's interesting to me is that Kimmel isn't actually being punished for his comments on the murder of Charlie Kirk per se. He's obviously not glorifying his violence. He's not justifying his murder. He's not defending the killer. He's instead commenting on the way that MAGA reacted to it. Do you think that nuance is important in your view to understanding the way that this is playing out and the apparent ideological shift then of the MAGA Republican Party on free speech?
Very much so. And, I think Jimmy Kimmel probably expressed himself in a way that was a little bit inconsequential. First of all, we don't have a lot of information on the killer of Charlie Kirk, but this nuance that you bring up is extremely important, and I think he just didn't express it very clearly. What he was trying to convey was that MAGA has encouraged political violence for a very long time. I don't think he was saying that Tyler Robinson was necessarily a member of the MAGA coalition, but he certainly was fueled in his instincts by years and years of sort of cult of violence. Now, to the shifts within the MAGA coalition towards freedom of speech, it's really interesting. Generally speaking, the right has traditionally been very much in favor of defending the traditional conception of freedom of speech, which is that in America, you cannot constrain speech and certainly not viewpoints unless they pose an imminent and credible threat to public order. Today, we're seeing some people in the Republican Party have a sort of variable or flexible view of freedom of speech. That is to say, they support it when it fits their goals and they suppress it when it doesn't.
I mean, it begs the question of whether or not, the MAGA right really ever was interested in free speech. Do you think that that was its aim, or its aim was to seize upon a moment, notably when, the woke left, as it's often called, was blamed for threatening freedom of speech? Do you think the real objective was simply to seize on a moment where its electorate would hear that argument and then leave it there?
I think there's both. I think within the Republican Party, in today's Republican Party, you still have a few remnants of the traditional Reagan Republican Party. But at the same time, the Republican Party today really gravitates around President Trump. And President Trump does not believe in freedom of speech. He only believes in freedom of speech insofar as it supports his goals. We can think about plenty of examples of such tension. Just a few days ago, the president said that he would sign an executive order to prosecute flag burning, for instance, which is, no matter what you think about this, is a constitutionally protected activity. Just this morning, he was saying we should go after channels that are critical of him. And a few months ago, he delivered a speech at DOJ where he said the activities of CNN and MSNBC were illegal. And what we see in today's Republican Party is that there aren't too many voices to stand up against that.
I want to talk about the way that the so-called protectors of free speech now in the United States is changing. Do you think that there is a credibility issue for the left? I see that Democrats have introduced a bill now to protect free speech after the suspension of Kimmel's show. But for many years, the left largely indeed defended things like refusing to allow speakers, the likes of Charlie Kirk included, from talking on campus because their ideas were offensive, because they were based in racism, a host of other issues. So is either party, in your view, better at genuinely protecting free speech, notably when it comes from its political enemies?
Well, this is a philosophical question in the sense that there isn't a right or wrong answer. The question is, what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize a healthy democracy where people are able to express themselves, but constrained by some civility standards or some safety standards? Or do you prioritize an absolutist view of free speech, in which case you don't believe those restrictions are legitimate? I don't think that there's a right or wrong question. Different democracies have approached this question differently. The US traditionally has approached it from an absolutist perspective, right? But it is true that both parties in some way now have tried to restrict free speech in this country, in the United States. The left has tried to do that on the grounds that some forms of political discourse is harmful. I believe some people have gone as far as trying to restrict speech that is ultra-conservative or anti-democratic or crypto-autocratic. But the Republican Party is trying to do that just on the basis of disagreement.
Julien Labarre, a political scientist at the University of Zurich, thank you very much for joining us today. That's all we have time for.
Thank you very much for having me.